currently the information stream on the topic of supply chain, from discussing the application of traditional theory to the latest technological advancements in the field, are all very vendor-driven without any clear, cohesive online forum to accommodate for informative discussions. Today, we will be discussing the state of online supply chain communities, the potentials that they may have, and the launch of news.lokad.com. So, Johannes, in your experience, what is the current state of information flow in the supply chain industry?
Nowadays, I would say there are two types of communities. There are one class of communities are essentially software-driven, platform-driven. So that's essentially that would be LinkedIn, Reddit,
social
Quora,
media, basically.
social media platforms. And then they have their own crowds. And I would say there is another type of communities which is basically influencer-driven. So there is one person that is a renowned expert, and there is a lot of people who follow this person. And possibly on several platforms, and those people might even have their own platforms. And so that's, but I would say overall it is fairly fragmented, and there is also, I would say, a series of I would say, of journals of supply chains, but I would say that have only fairly limited audience compared to all the rest combined.
And what is the most popular online forum at the moment?
So probably LinkedIn, although LinkedIn is everything professional. So
yeah, it's not supply chain.
The content that is about supply chain, I mean, obviously supply chain minded people discuss about supply chain on LinkedIn, but overall it is very, very diluted. And Reddit would maybe come second, but it is a very, very distant second. And the amount of supply chain stuff that you can find is overall very, very limited.
So who are the people who spend time on this forum on Reddit? Are those supply chain practitioners? Or those
That's part of the problem of, I would say, Reddit, is that the sort of ways it is done, it's very anonymous. And I would say the overwhelming majority of the contributors, if you go to so Reddit is organized into subreddits that are like forums for or boards for a specific topic. If you go to the supply chain subreddit, I would say the vast majority of the posts are made by very, very young people, possibly teenagers or late teenagers, very young adults, who are just asking, oh, is it interesting to do supply chain for a career? And that's like maybe 2/3 of the post. And then you have people that are barely older that reply. So that's that has, I would say, a very, very different vibe compared to LinkedIn, where you have people from all age, I would say from basically 20 to 65 or even 70. But no, on Reddit it is very, very young, and as a result, I would say most of the discussions are not so interesting. Just
sounds
due
like
to
they're
the
very
fact
self-centered, kind of career-oriented, rather than what the
I
actual
mean,
supply chain is.
it is a board that is dominated by people who are asking exceedingly basic questions, which is fine, except that when there is only that, then you have an entire board that is filled like by questions like, should I start my career in supply chain? Again, it's not bad if you have once in a while a question like that. If 90% of your posts are questions like that, then it means that the added value for a supply chain professional would to actually consult this sort of board would be very, very limited.
So the actual, say, informative knowledge is very diluted, you would say?
Yes, it's very diluted. I mean, there is very few places online where you can learn anything about supply chains. Most of the Wikipedia pages on those topics are pure garbage. The
Why
Wikipedia,
is
that? Mostly, I mean, the Wikipedia is in general very bad for a certain class of stuff and very good for a certain class of other stuff. The sort of stuff where the Wikipedia is downright excellent are things that are old, non-commercial, and that only attracts passionate people. So, for example, mathematics. You will have like the Wikipedia page about mathematics are usually brilliant.
It's also quite static though, mathematics. It doesn't
but if you're looking for also pages about ancient music instruments, you will have pages that are absolutely excellent. If you're looking for pages about living persons, it's going to be complete crap. If you're looking about pages about, I would say, software that are being sold, it's also going to be complete crap. For example, the Wikipedia page about ERP is so vendor-driven. You can see that the page had been, there has been, I would say, infighting between 20 different ERP vendors that were trying to purge their own stuff. The result is that it's a page that it's almost impossible to understand what the hell is going on with ERPs by actually reading the page, which should have been the point of, I would say, an encyclopedia page about covering the ERPs. But the same can be said for pretty much every single, I would say, supply chain topic, which has almost, I would say, a vendor element to it, in the sense that there are people who happen to be selling the stuff.
Right.
And that's the sort of areas where Wikipedia is just very weak. But more generally, it is also very incomplete. And if you're a young professional who is interested in supply chain, as I was, a decade and a half ago, the reality is that the world of supply chain is still exceedingly opaque, and that there is very little to learn from the books, either written by academia or by consultants.
Is it because that classical theory is not really applicable in real life?
I mean, first, the supply chain theory, so again, don't discuss entire classes of problems that are very, very relevant. You see, a book about supply chain theory will only discuss a mathematical formula, so will not discuss the fact that you have an applicative landscape. So the data doesn't fall from the sky. There are tons of things to be considered, considering the applicative landscape. Then there are teams operating those softwares that needs to be considered. And so you see, there are classes of complexities that are just not there.
So are they lacking behind the software that we currently have?
Or the opposite, or the theories is just exceedingly beyond what the software actually implements. You see, it's just a vast disconnect, and then they don't discuss at all the problems with the computing hardware that you can have, the problems of reliability in the sense of industrial reliability, and then you have all the problem of security, like computer security. It's like there is a wide spectrum of topics that if you want to have something that is real and that works in the real world, it is not just the supply chain formula. There is tons of things that comes before, after, and conversely, the books about, I would say, written by consultants, they tend also to very much focus on, I would say, the leadership, the management. I mean, they are trying to sell themselves to the upper management of the company, but as a counterpart, they tend to be relatively shallow, again, on the applicative landscape, again, on the sort of environment. How do you connect to your clients? I mean, technically speaking, how do you connect to your clients? How do you connect to your suppliers? How does all the plumbing look like, et cetera, et cetera? There is so many things. And again, this is the sort of things, because every single company is unique, it's very hard to discuss about that in a book, because that would be like a very, very specific case study. But nevertheless, if you want to learn anything that is valuable for a real-world experience, it would be very interesting to have a place to be able to discuss the specifics, discuss the case of a vendor on this particular situation, or the applicability of a given technique or technology to this specific situation as well.
So speaking of the space, what is news.lokad.com that we recently launched?
So news.lokad.com is a shameless clone of Hacker News. So Hacker News is, I would say, an old school, minimalistic looking online board, posting board. It is intended for news, as in novelty, but also just posting anything that would be of interest to the supply chain community. So it's very much oriented toward submitting a link with a title and then discussing the content of this link and its title. So it's not news.lokad.com is not expected to be the primary place for the publication of new things. It's not like the place where you're going to publish a brand new article. You can post that on LinkedIn, you can post that on Medium, you can post that on your own blog if you have one. But news is supposed to be like an aggregator that consolidates interesting links and where the community can very openly and easily discuss. And the design is very minimalistic. So no fuss, for example, for the registration, we are not asking. So it's a software that I've implemented this summer. But essentially, the registration just asks you for a username and a password. There is no email that is asked. You can actually have an email if you want to for password recovery. But the idea is that there is no ads. The amount of Chrome, the Chrome is all the parts of the user interface that are just there.
So it's a non-profit forum for
Yeah,
people.
it's essentially, I mean, obviously, Lokad, it is something that is hosted by Lokad, but it is not advertising for Lokad, and the post that concerns Lokad do not get more visibility just because they are at Lokad. So everything is purely ranked based, Reddit style, based on the community upvotes, and Lokad doesn't get any bonus compared to anything else.
So to remove this vendor bias as much as possible.
I mean, my big theory is that you can't remove vendor bias. You can only have other vendors that will provide counterbalance to the bias. So you see, if you have just Lokad, then you have the bias of Lokad, which is of a different kind compared to another. However, if you have different vendors that can express their opinion, then suddenly you will not have something in the middle, but at least you will see, because nobody expects people to come to an agreement, but at least visitors will have the opportunity to see the various arguments being presented and decide for themselves what they think is the most convincing argument.
So it's a forum that encourages discussion on the topic.
Yes, I mean, that's something I learned from the software community. You see, software, the main problem that you have with software is that every single project is unique. You see, you're implementing a piece of software, but if it's already done, why are you doing it? So chances are that if you're doing software, it's precisely because it hasn't been done before exactly like that. Otherwise, you would just buy the product on the shelf. So every single project in the software industry is a fundamentally novel undertaking, at least to some extent. And thus, you end up with, I would say, a difficulty, which is how do you compare anything to anything? Every single product is kind of unique. Their own journey is kind of unique. The sort of problem that one team faced at a point of time may be different from the problems that other teams will face later because the ecosystem has changed, a few years down the road. And nevertheless, those online boards that exist that have been existing for decades for the software industry, to have those, I would say, those discussion between peers online are incredibly valuable because that's how you can sort out, what are truly the good design, the way you should even think about the problems, the way you should, what should you even understand when there is somebody who is making an announcement about a piece of technology or a piece of process, etc. How should you even read this into your situation? That this sort of communities, at least for me, have been incredibly helpful on the supply chain side, on the software side, because those communities exist. And when I started Lokad a decade and a half ago, and through my journey, I realized that there was no such thing on the supply chain side, and it's very, very difficult to have any kind of, I would say, intelligent debate with peers online anywhere on the internet at the moment.
So how does news.lokad.com compare to the subreddit of the supply chain?
So subreddit, the supply chain subreddit, every subreddit is heavily influenced by the moderators that operate this very specific subreddit.
How?
Just because moderators can actually decide to censor whatever they want to censor. That's the way Reddit is organized. Reddit, you claim your space in Reddit, your subreddit, and then you're the owner of this small part of Reddit. That's the way Reddit is actually engineered. And so in the specific case of the supply chain Reddit, well, the problem is that the people who claim this space essentially decided that they don't want, whatever the reasons, they don't want to have links pointing outside Reddit. So they only have inward-looking discussion. And when these sort of things happen, I was saying that on Reddit you only have students, is that the mass majority of people who have something interesting to say about supply chain are not going to post this on Reddit. They are going to post it somewhere else. I mean, when McKinsey produce a report about supply chain, and some of them are fairly interesting, they don't post on Reddit. They post their report on McKinsey.com. It's fine.
But Reddit prefers to have
and
only
Reddit,
internal links, basically?
No, the moderators of this Reddit, the moderators of this Reddit, other moderators could have decided another policy, but it turned out that those moderators just decided, for whatever the reasons, that they don't want to have links that are linking outside. I know why they choose that, because there are so many vendors who are trying to flood this forum with low effort marketing, cheap marketing contents and plugs, that they decided, okay, 99% of those links linking outside are just garbage.
Sales, basically.
And so let's prevent all of that. I understand that's a problem. I believe that massive, heavy-handed censorship is not the way to go, or at least that there are better alternatives. So that would be my comparison with Reddit, is that unfortunately, due to the fact that they have this no outside link policy, they end up with the only people who have something to say are basically students who have a question to ask, but it makes the discussion, I would say, very uninteresting, because it's always like the super basic question that are being asked, and there is no really good answer to those questions. I mean, or at least when you have like one student per week that asks the question, should I enter, supply chain as a career? It's yeah, I mean, there are pros and cons, but fundamentally the answers that were given last week are still, applicable next week. So it's not very interesting to actually revisit again and again the same question.
Right. So what is your main goal with this website that we've launched, news.lokad.com?
So
what do you hope to achieve?
My goal would be to try to contribute to the overall improvements of supply chains. I mean, even if it's very fractionally, very marginally, but to give a place where there are intelligent discussion happening, so that first new, I would say, young, brilliant engineers, people with talents can find a place where they can learn a lot by having a community that sort out, the truly interesting stuff, and that shows how to even think about the problems. You see,
so concentrated knowledge without distractions of ads or sales.
Yes, and when you say knowledge, it's not. I mean, knowledge can take many forms. For example, when I learned about the software industry, I discovered that on more than 2 decades ago on forums that were called at the time Joel on Software Forums. And the interesting things, that was the most interesting thing for me, was the way people even approached problems. So you see, they were presented the software situation, and it was a forum where there was a lot of business owners, the people who were literally business owners of software companies. And it was discussion it was very interesting for me to see how those people were even thinking, what was their way to look at the problem. Not just the specific, conclusion on this question or announcement or thing, but the way they were even looking at the problem. And you see, when there is an announcement by a company, there are all sorts of questions such as, why is this company making this announcement? Why now? Is it true? Is it important? Is it important now, or will it become important 5 years down the road? You see, there are plenty of meta questions, and what I found is there are forums where you can find online for the software industry those sort of discussion. There is no such thing for supply chain. So my hopes is to achieve a place where there is all those sort of, I would say, discussions that emerge, and with a place which is very open, with, I would say, very light-handed censorship. I mean, or moderation. You have to have, with any online community, you need to have a little bit of online moderation. It is unavoidable. Otherwise, there are some people are going to post things that are just plain rude, unacceptable, or or just profanities.
Trolls, yeah.
But I mean, you don't want to filter people just because they're not neutral. You just want to filter people that are very obviously crossing the lines, profanities, insults, these sort of things. But we're just people that are attacking the ideas, just fine. You can be pretty brutal and just have an argumentation that just destroy whatever is proposed. That's fine. That's fine.
Can you give some examples of the latest posts on the forum?
I mean, there have been dozens of posts. It can be anything, I've posted things about the patents that made, the patents that made history, the patent for the barcode, for example. They can be, so that can be a very old news. That can be a series of McKinsey's reports. Some of them are not even very recent. They are not necessarily. I'm a big believer that if something that was published, a decade ago is still very relevant, then it was probably a very good document in the first place. And then there are some news about that are Lokad centric, but the bottom line is that it doesn't matter what sort of example, it's more like an attitude of, is it a link that refers to something that is of interest to supply chain minded person, and then it's a community who votes. So you see, my opinion doesn't really matter. It's what gets voted surfaces to the top,
and that's how encourages healthy discussion.
Yes, and also it concentrates the discussions on the stuff that are really interesting.
So lastly, what do you hope that news.lokad.com will do for the supply chain community?
I mean, if it can be a place where I would say the claims of all the vendors, because obviously supply chains are operated by companies. It's unavoidable. There are people who can sell you a warehouse. There are people that can sell you a truck. There are people who can sell you the software to operate the warehouse. There are people that can sell you the software to operate your fleet of trucks, etc., etc. So whatever question or concern that you have, there are vendors. That's the way it is. This is a business environment.
Maybe encourage the challenge of status quo in supply chain?
My concern is not to change the status quo. My concern is that to even have intelligent discussions about things like what works, what doesn't work, what should be considered as good practice or better practices. You see, changing for the sake of changing is meaningless. And sometimes there are things that have been done for a very, very long time that are just fine. They don't need changing, and there are plenty of things where this glass as a design, it is, we have been doing glasses like that for hundreds of years. It doesn't mean that there is anything urgent in fundamentally, radically changing this design. So the question is that having a place where you can have really, I would say, in-depth discussion that are not just trying to, I would say, doing virtue signaling like it is on LinkedIn, so that there is something that is about the post and not about the author, that tries to show off and to shine with one of their pet initiative, and also to have something that where people could actually come to this board every single day and learn something new and interesting every single day. That would be my hope, is that supply chain professionals could potentially visit this thing 5 minutes a day, find a couple of posts that are really worth their attention, as opposed to, let's say,
Combing through lots of
LinkedIn threads, which is endless and filled of, I would say, 99% low effort garbage.
Well, it will be very exciting to see how news.lokad.com is going to grow and what it will do to the community. Thanks so much for tuning in. Check out news.lokad.com and let us know what you think.